All right, so what we'll do is we'll create a new project here, and we'll do a little example of building a dynamically building an array with some class members in it. Let's see. So I need to go to find the review. Path does not exist. There we go. Select that folder. Here, class review. Okay, next, make it an empty project. Finish. Okay. So what I'm going to do first, and I'm going to do this all in the single CPP file just to make it simple. And so we'll start off, include IOStream, and using namespace standard. And then I'm going to create a point class. And there's a colon after public, right? Yeah. Just going to create doubles x and y. Just the whole point is not to make a bunch of stuff in the class, but what we want to get at is how in main we can make an array of points. Okay, and so we need to create a pointer to a point. Okay, and then we need to allocate memory for this array. So we want my array equals new point, and let's say we want 10 of them. And then of course after we're done we want to delete all of my array. And so this should work. Let's see if how much I've forgotten since we did C++. Okay, so it succeeded. All right, so what we've done here is right now the point, this class doesn't really do anything. It has two data members, but we have created an array. So now my array has a bunch of members in it. Maybe we'll do this. So we can see in here that we have my array. Let's look at the code. And in my array, there are, well, that's my array 0. Yeah, that's not especially helpful, is it? Okay, let's do this. For int I equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus, we can do a cout of my array I.x and my array I.y. Okay, so what I've done now is I've created a pointer to a point, and I've now created my dynamic array with 10 points in it. Now nothing, x and y haven't been initialized yet, so they're just dummy values, and now I've got a for loop to loop through each one of them and print out what is the x value, what is the I value in each one of those arrays. Now as it turns out, they all happen to have the same value because whatever, they're uninitialized. Okay, so when you originally, Mark, asked your question about this, you're like, I don't understand how to pass the pointer to the class. And we're never passing the pointer into the class, but rather the pointer, it's going the other direction almost, where the class definition is being used to build the array. So the class definition is informing the pointer rather than the other way around. Now I'm not sure if that's just, when you ask the question is just getting the terminology to work to ask the question that you wanted, or whether it was an understanding issue.
I think it's probably just understanding.
See, because
I don't remember that you put
Right. So, well, let's do something simpler. Okay. Let's create a dynamically create an array of doubles. Okay. And you can see the parallels of the. Okay. Okay, so now we've built sort of a parallel structure. Forgot that. I built a parallel structure here to show you, a simple thing where we're creating a dynamic array of doubles and then doing a similar thing for a dynamic array of the points. Okay, so here I've declared a pointer to a double. And now I've allocated memory for 10 spots, 10 doubles for val. So after I do this line, now I can do val bracket 0, val bracket 1, up to val bracket 9 because there's 10 things. Okay? And so here I've set, stored a value of 2 times I into there and then displayed it on the screen. So first it displays, 0 through 18 because, 0 through 9 times 2. Okay? And so, this idea of having an array of doubles is not so strange. Okay, you're used to that. The only difference here is that we're doing it dynamically rather than statically. Okay, we can do all that again. Let me do this. Double other val 10. That's the way you would normally do it. So this piece of code does exactly the same thing as this piece of code. The only difference is that this one is statically allocated and this one's dynamically allocated. Okay, so this you should be perfectly comfortable with before you come into the class. Okay, and then we added this part which adds some complexity by making it dynamically allocated. Then the next step is, instead of creating a dynamically allocated array of doubles, we'll just do it with points. So the only thing that's changed is what is the data type of the array. Here the data type of the array is a double. Here the data type of the array is a point. And after I dynamically allocate memory, then I can index the name of the array here with 0 through 9. Yeah, Logan.
So because those are dynamically allocated, does that mean you can put a variable in for the size of the array?
So his question is, because they're dynamically allocated, does that mean we can put a variable in for the size of the array? And yes, you can. Okay, so I could say int n equals 10, and I can put n here, and I can put n here, okay, as well as putting n here and here. And if I run that, there's an error. Let's see, where's my error? Other val. Okay, it runs first statically allocated, then it runs dynamically allocated, then it does the points. Okay, and that works with n equal 10. Now if I changed this now to a 10 to n and this to n, I will get an error. Okay, it says the expression here must have a constant value. Okay, so you're exactly right. The benefit of doing it as a dynamic array is that you can have it be a variable number of things in your array. Okay, and we made that even more obvious oftentimes where we'd ask the user to say, how many do you want? Because that way you don't know when you're compiling your program how many there's going to be in that array.
When you
define cn as a const and then make it
Right.
work?
The other thing you can do is if you want that to be an n, which is a good idea, you know, because now if I wanted to change the number in this array, I wouldn't have to go and change both of these n's. I'd only have to change in one place. And so now if I run that, it does run because n is actually not a variable anymore, it's a constant.
Okay, what if you...
And I got you, Hannah. No, go ahead.
I was going to
Finish.
ask the same thing.
Okay.
Okay, what if you cn, you know, how many inputs in as a const?
You can't.
Can't.
You can't see in something as a const because if it's a const, it has to be a variable to be able to store it. Because what's actually interesting is that when you see this, you think that the compiler creates this variable called n, but then just stores 10 in it, but just never allows you to change it. But that's not actually what happens here. What actually happens is before it compiles, it does a search and replace for n. It does a search and replace. Wherever it sees n, it changes that to 10 before it even compiles it. So there's never any memory made for this n, but rather there's a search and replace that happens just to turn all the n's into 10s.
Okay.
So there's no way then that you could make a const thing be what you're entering in, because before the compiler runs the program, it has to know the value.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was like Python, where after they input it, you can change it to the type
Right.
of variable.
Yeah,
that
it's
you
not like Python where you can change things after. Right. No, it doesn't work that way.
Okay.
Okay? So Mark, does this help answer your original confusion over this?
I think so.
So what I recommend you do is go back to looking at how would you do it with the standard data type versus, and then the only thing you change is the data type. You know, everything else is the same basically. Do you want me to write how to create a static array of points?
No, I don't have.
Okay, because if you know how to do a static array of points, because I mean really all you do is instead of that line you just do point my array n, which n is a const now, so this will work. Okay, so what's interesting is the code that comes after the declaration of the array is exactly the same whether you create it dynamically or statically. So this part of the program and whatever else uses my array after it doesn't ever change. Nothing's ever different. Okay? The only thing that's different is either I declare it statically like this or I do dynamically like that. And of course, if you have something dynamic, you should delete it in the end to keep from losing your memory. Okay? But, you know, that's again my suggestion is, you know, if you're worried about how the dynamic stuff works, all you have to do is replace, you know, these two lines. Replace those two lines with that, and then that's all. That's the only difference, because the way you use it is the same. Okay, so those are the two things I draw on, looking at how would I create a static array of the class, and how would I do a dynamic array of something of a regular class that you're used to. Okay, and you know what's interesting is that you don't really. You know, Python is so built on this object-oriented, but we haven't actually created classes ourselves. But you've seen like the sir equals serial command. That makes sir becomes a member of this serial class. And you know, the NumPy array is a different class. And so, you know, it's really neat once you can do this object-oriented and at least understand how it works. And to be honest, most of what you're going to do as a mechatronics engineer is going to be using existing class structures. Okay, so that's why I haven't gone, you know, into great detail about how to create your own custom classes. I want you to see how to do that, understand it a little bit, but mostly you're just going to be working with them like you do in Python. Okay? And when you get into MTRE2610, you're going to be working with these mobile robots, and there's a library for how to access the commands to those robots, and it's object-oriented. So you're going to have to use member functions and data members and stuff like that, you know, to use that class. And that's going to be the vast majority of how you're going to be doing stuff. Okay. Yes, Destiny.
Over constructors and the inheritance.
Okay. So does that seem like a good next topic to look at? Is some inheritance stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I was trying to think of a good new example for doing that, and I don't know if let's do something university related. So I'll go ahead and delete this stuff out, and let's create a class called university. Okay. And we'll have an integer for the number of students. Okay. And we will have well, you know what? Let's make that private. Because that's more typical, is to make the data members private and then access them through public member functions. So let's create a constructor university that takes no input arguments, and let's create another constructor that takes in an integer start students. Okay. And so now let's go ahead and write the implementations for these. Now, why is it unhappy with that? Okay, because we haven't defined. Let's define the function. So, university, we need to use the scope resolution operator to say that we're working on something in the university class. So let's create the default constructor. See, now it's happy that I'm creating that function. And we'll set the num students equal to 0 if we call a constructor that takes in no arguments. Okay, and then let's do the other constructor that takes in an integer, and we will set the number of students to be however many are passed in. Okay, so now we've got this thing declared. It doesn't look like there's any squigglies, so it looks relatively happy with us. Let's make our main function. All right, and I will declare, if I could spell, KSU, and what do we have, like 32,000 students, something like that, and Georgia Tech. Okay. Now you'll notice here that when I declared KSU, I called the constructor that takes one input argument because I passed an integer, and here I created Georgia Tech that is going to use the default constructor. Okay. Now let's have some sort of output here. Yes.
Does white space matter in this? If it's icon?
No, white space doesn't matter at all. It does, just to make it look clean, but it's not necessary. Okay, and it is actually, you know, any good computer science professor is gonna, you know, harp on that to make sure that you do the indentations. And you know, for you that's writing the code right now, it probably doesn't make much difference. But the more you use the indentations, the easier it will be for someone else to come and look at your code and understand it, and the easier you will understand your code when you go back to look at it a month later. So, you know, basically you could go back to your first homework assignment and go back and look at it, and if it doesn't have indentations in there, you might be wondering, well, what things are part of that for loop and where does that end? And, you know, so no, it's not necessary, but you really need to, you know, follow those sort of rules of thumb just so that you know, your code's easier to read. So let's go ahead and create a helper function for the insertion operator. OStream operator insertion, and will be an OStream reference out and then the university uni. And we'll do this, return out insertion operator as, and we're going to need to create another function for getting the number of students. Because we've made num students private, I cannot just simply replace this with num students. I can't do that because num students is private, and that's probably what it's saying here. Okay, it's inaccessible because it's private. Okay, and that's typical. Is usually we will have a member function to be able to access the data members. So let's create a member function here, get num students. It doesn't take any inputs in, but it returns the number of students. So we'll do this reverse.
Does capitalization matter? Because you have num students capitalized on get num students, but not on.
These are separate things.
No,
or
when you're proving your point. Oh, never mind. You changed it before. I got it.
Okay.
I missed you changing the capital N. I know, right?
Well, you know what's really funny is that I'm actually a hunt and pecker. I have never learned to type correctly.
You are very good.
So I've just
When code, it doesn't really seem to help that you're on type because you're always pushing the shift key.
yeah. All right, so I created this member function get num students that just simply returns the number of students because num students is private. Okay, and I want it, and this helper function is not part of the class. You know, it's an overloaded insertion operator, and it needs the number of students so that it can print that out. So then down here, I'm going to do cout KSU end line Georgia Tech end line to show how Georgia Tech should end up printing that it has 0 students and KSU, of course, 32,000. So let's see if that will run, and indeed it does, like I had hoped it would. Okay, so before we go on, let's review what we've got, make sure everybody's with us. Okay, we have, in our university class, we have 1 data member that's private. Okay, we have 2 constructors, one that takes nothing and it sets the number of students to 0, and then another constructor that sets the number of students to however many were passed in. Okay, then we have a function get num students down here that it just simply returns this private data member so that the helper function that is the insertion operator can get however many students there are. Okay, so we're halfway along the way to answering Destiny's question, because I think he was interested in having things having to do with inheritance and constructors. Okay, so right now we just have a university base class. Okay, and so let's now create something to inherit from university, and we'll call it comprehensive. So I don't know how many of you, it's a single colon, right? I can never remember, I think so. Let's see, does that compile and run? Yeah, okay. I don't know, do you guys know that the different classifications of universities in the university system of Georgia? We are technically what's called a comprehensive university, which is different from Georgia Tech, which is considered a research university. So there's a technical difference, and comprehensive is supposed to be meeting the needs of the community and all this stuff. And so what I would like to do now is to create the comprehensive university that inherits from the regular university. And generally, this is completely not true, but just to make things simple, let's say that comprehensive universities are generally focused on undergraduate programs and research universities are generally interested with graduate programs, okay, and community colleges, associate's degree. So, of course, that's a total oversimplification. But we'll go ahead and say that a comprehensive university is going to have another data member that says number of undergrad programs. Okay. Now, of course, Georgia Tech has undergraduate programs too, but I'm just trying to, make a point here. Okay. And so we'll have a number of undergraduate programs, and then we will have a public constructor. And so we need to call it comprehensive. It must have the same name as it has to have that name has to be the same as this name. Okay, and we'll take in two arguments. We'll take in a number of students and number of undergraduate programs. Okay, so let's now write the constructor for that. Comprehensive int students int u programs. Okay, so here's the constructor, and we will go ahead and say that num undergrad programs equals u programs. And we could go ahead and say num students equals students, or we could go ahead and piggyback on the constructor that already exists for the base class. Okay, so instead we can call the university's constructor and pass to it students. Now I think I have the syntax right. Let me go ahead and see if this runs.
Does the single colon do, sir?
Okay, so the single colon here simply says I want to call the non-default university constructor. Okay, and then I want to have because the colon, and I don't have any better answer than that because I'm not sure exactly what it does, but basically if you did this, let me go ahead and prove a point here. We'll put that back in. Cout, we'll print num students. What's that?
Isn't it private anyway?
It is private, and it says it's inaccessible, but we can get around that by making this protected. Okay, so now that it's protected, that squiggle goes away and I can access it. Okay, and so now the syntax and everything's right, but right now I haven't used comprehensive yet. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll take KSU out of here, and we'll get to changing Georgia Tech here in a minute, but comprehensive. Okay, now comprehensive, if I could spell it right. Okay, comprehensive, now if I try to run this, it will give me an error. And the error we can see here, it says no instance of the constructor matches the argument list. And the reason is because KSU, we're now trying to create it as a comprehensive data as its class. And if we look in the comprehensive definition, the only constructor takes 2 input arguments, and I've only given it 1, and that's why it's complaining, because it's expecting 2 input arguments. So that's the number of students, and then we'll pass to it the number of programs. I don't know, how many programs do we have? 43? I don't know. However many programs
42
there.
is the answer of life.
Yeah, right. Okay, 42. Okay, much better. So now it's not complaining. It is complaining that there's no. It's interesting. So what the problem is here is that this insertion operator is expecting a university when I'm passing to it a comprehensive. Okay, and that's a little bit tricky. We never really covered anything like that, but just to start off with, we'll go ahead and take that out. Okay? Now, the point I wanted to make here is if we look at the constructor for comprehensive, I haven't done anything with students yet, you'll notice. I wrote over what uPrograms does. Okay? But I haven't done anything with students, so you would expect nothing to happen with students, that it would just be whatever dummy value it has. But you'll notice here that this 0 here is from this cout. And so when I called comprehensive, it actually has set as 0 students rather than just gobbledygook. And the reason it has 0 students in there is because it has automatically, the comprehensive constructor has automatically called the default university constructor. Okay? So even though I haven't explicitly told the computer what to do when I create a comprehensive, it must run the constructor of the base class. And if I don't tell it which one I want to call, it will call the default one that has no input arguments. Okay? So this brings me back to Mike's question, what is the point of this colon? And the point of this colon, for all intents and purposes, because I must plead my ignorance, and I'm not exactly sure, in the exact details what it means, but basically if I don't want to use the default constructor, I can say, hey, use the university constructor that takes an input argument and pass to it the number of students. Okay? And so now when I run this program, you can see that now I have 32,000 in there. Even though I haven't done anything with the number of students in comprehensive, I told it to call the university's constructor that takes students, and it gets set. Okay? And so that, of course, is the most object-oriented like way to do this, rather than writing in here, num students equals students. I mean, that will work fine, and you could take this part out, but part of the whole point of object-oriented stuff is to reuse the code you have and share things across the different classes. Okay? All right. Question?
I was going to ask about the operator overloading.
Operator overloading.
For the insertion operator.
Okay.
Because I don't understand the syntax, especially with the ones when it's the read in and out that we were using from like way back then. I didn't understand how the syntax works.
So you want me to describe the syntax of how this function works?
Like how it's reading it.
Okay. So we're overloading the insertion operator. We use the insertion operator when we're doing a cout. Okay, and basically when you want to stuff something to the screen, you use the insertion operator. It takes whatever this is and it puts it into that output stream, and cout happens to be for the screen. And then after it does that, then it stuffs the end line in there. Okay, now the computer will only be able to stuff something in the output stream if it has been told how to deal with that data type. Okay, so if this is just the number 6, it knows how to take an integer and stuff an integer into the output stream. But to start off with, it doesn't know how to stuff a university into the output stream. Okay, it does now because we told it. But if I did KSU, it gives me the squiggle because I've never told it how to stuff a comprehensive into the output stream. Okay, now let's go back to doing a university and looking at how we've overloaded this. Okay, so the name of the function that we're creating is the insertion operator, and that's the function name, operator less than, because we're doing the insertion operator. Then we need to tell it, what does this function return, and what are the input arguments and their data types. Just like any function, no matter what function, whether it's operator less than, any function that we create, we need to say, what are the output type and what are the input arguments and their types. So in that sense, we're just creating a function like any other function. Now, what this does is it returns an output stream, and it takes in an output stream and this new thing that we're trying to teach it how to put in the output stream. Okay? Now, your main question about the syntax probably has to do with these ampersands. Okay? And what the ampersands say to do is pass this by reference rather than passing by value. Okay? And basically, if you pass by reference, you're sending to it a pointer of where to find the class's instance, rather than here are all of the data members and all of the member functions, copy them all over into this new thing. Okay, so the purpose of using the ampersand and doing pass by reference is to save time and to save memory. Okay, so we could just take those ampersands out and we could make things work like that, but the performance will not be as good. Okay, and in any case, the output stream is not actually configured to work that way. It has to actually have a reference. But in theory, you could take those ampersands away and everything would work the same. It would just be slower and take up more memory. Okay? So we're passing to it, by reference, an output stream. Okay? And when we do cout, and let's make this simpler, when we do cout less than Georgia Tech, this is the first input argument to the function, and this is the second input argument. So cout is what ends up becoming out here. So when I make this line of code, it calls the operator less than, it passes cout into this place, and it passes Georgia Tech into this place. Okay? And then what I do is I say, okay, well, let's stuff the string has into out, which is cout. Then let's stuff the number of students into cout. Let's stuff the string students into cout. And let's stuff an end line character into cout. That's what this line of code does. Then it returns the output stream, which is cout. And the reason it returns that is so that we can chain these things together. I wouldn't need to return anything if I just did this, but if I want to chain that together and do an end line as well, I would need the output argument, because what happens is this thing gets replaced with whatever less than returns. So this thing ends up being replaced with the cout that has already had the Georgia Tech stuff stuffed into it. Okay? And so that gets replaced, just like if I did 5 plus 6 plus 7. First, it will call 5 plus 6, and this thing will be replaced with 11, and then it calls the plus again by passing 11 and 7. It's in the same way, this works the same way. First it stuffs that into that, and then it stuffs this into what is ever returned by that function. Okay? Does that help at all?
Yeah. So how does it recognize that the endl isn't this? You're calling
because endl is a constant that exists, and cout has already been taught what to do. There already exists an operator less than with the data type of the constant that endl is. So there already exists somewhere code for operator less than accepting whatever end line's data type is. That's already exists, just like there's a less than for when you put an integer or a float or a char or a string. It's already built in a namespace standard.
So, like right now, what was it? Did you have KSP being sent up with it?
Right now, Georgia Tech is being sent.
And does Georgia Tech say what? Like
It's a university. Its data type is university right now. Okay?
So if it was an integer, it would, if there was, I put 5 or I had an end that was like.
Well, I could do this. You know, that will work as well, because it knows how to stuff the integer 5 into cout. An integer data type, it knows how to do that.
Right. So it wouldn't. Would it call the? It wouldn't call the.
It would not call this one anymore. It would not call this because we're not sending it to university.
So if I put instead of if I just put int uni or I've got the operator over here.
Ah, yes. If I made this int, yes. I'm pretty sure. Oh, come on. It's going to give me an error on that. Ha 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 ha. Okay. We couldn't trick it. It says, oh, hold on here. You have 2 functions that say what to do with an integer. How the hell am I supposed to know which one to use? There is more than one operator that matches these operands. So we have one that takes an output stream and an integer, and C++ already has one that takes an output stream and an integer, and it's saying, no, I'm sorry, I'm confused. There's 2 of these, I don't know which one to use. I thought it might use the one that we did and overwrite it, but no, it will not do it because it's confusing.
Can you scroll up a little bit for the initialization and get num-student?
Sure.
Because for some reason mine is didn't fit. Yeah. I got that, and for some reason it's saying it's not a valid syntax or something.
Well, we'll have a look. We've got to cut it off here, and let me take any last questions, and then I'll help you, Patrick. Anybody have any last questions? Did that answer the type of thing you're after, Destiny? Okay, so go back, maybe look over the old lecture recordings, you know, look at some of the old tests, come to my office hours. I'll be around every day, so, you know, let me know if there's anything you need help with, okay?